today's topic is the brand promise. And a lot of people are confused about what brand promise means, or what exactly does that describe. So part of what we're going to do in this discussion today is to talk about what is a brand promise, how you would apply it to your particular business if in fact you haven't developed your brand promise, and then the need to execute the brand promise. So it's one thing to say, hey, we've got 24-hour service, 365 days a year, and then it's a whole other thing to actually be able to deliver on that brand promise. So with that in mind, let's take a look at a couple of characteristics for what makes for a good brand promise structurally, so that you understand as you develop yours for your company, there are some general rules or guidelines that we would use to make sure that a brand promise would fit, so that as you apply that to your marketing and your principles of being able to go to the external media campaigns to be able to attract consumers, the brand promise is the driving feature. What we used to call the unique selling proposition back in the 80s, we now call the brand promise in the 2000s. So let's have a little discussion about that. First off, the company needs a brand promise. You have to have the brand promise out front and center. Now, each company has its own unique brand promise, and that's fine. So the next question becomes, how do I define what is a brand promise? What is that? So we used to talk about the unique selling proposition, or what people will call USP. That is what makes you unique in the marketplace compared to all other choices in the market. So that is up to you to decide what that is. It's part art, part science. You'd like to make sure your brand promise is something that a customer would need and like, but at the end of the day, it's also something that needs to be unique to you. You don't want to be a me too company. So the next discussion is we want to be credible and we want to be compelling. And the most important part of that discussion is, while we want to be credible and compelling, we need the promise to be kept, and we need it to be kept every single time. So the idea that employee training, the ability to create execution, whatever you decide you promise, you need to be able to deliver on that execution, or you will find that customers will not be happy with you. And because of that, you're going to lose traction around your brand. That's probably going to affect your long-term value and wealth of the company, but it's also going to affect the customer referral process. Lastly, you really want to have that ideally be measurable. And when I say measurable, a good example of a brand promise is in one of the businesses that I own and work with. We have a brand promise to deliver the lowest cost per lead in the industry. So that is a measurable item. We can measure our cost per lead for our client. We can measure the cost per lead individually against a group of clients. We can measure that against competition. So either we have the ability to deliver the lowest cost per lead, or we do not. So it becomes a brand promise. Hey, we're going to give you the lowest cost per lead of any business in this space or vertical. And so the question becomes, now how do we measure that? Well, we use dashboard metrics, call tracking, and we manage that process as detailed as we can. So the purpose of the measurability is to say, yeah, we have kept our promise. So we're setting an expectation for a client, and the deliverable has to be that each and every time we're working to deliver on that brand promise. So let's go to the next slide, and I'm going to give you some examples of some brand promises that are in the industry and a couple that are not in the industry. The first one is on-time service or it's free. So the brand promise there is, I'm going to tell you a specific time or a time frame that I'm going to be there, and if I'm not on time, it's free. The second one there is one we've seen in the industry for many years: 2 years, money back, no questions asked, guarantee. So the idea would be, take it for a test drive. Whatever happens in the next 2 years, if you're not satisfied, if we can't completely fix it to your satisfaction, we'll give you your money back. That's a brand promise. And certainly if you make that brand promise, you're going to want to make sure that you can deliver on that. So that becomes a costing and a pricing and a reserve issue. But still, it's a compelling brand promise, because from an advertising and marketing point of view, you really have something that most people won't step up to the plate to deliver. Another one, which we've seen in the industry for quite some time, lifetime guarantee on service repairs. I do that. Some of my friends that we've had relationships with in the consulting practice, we've convinced to do that. None of us have gone out of business, and the reason is that you have to stay in the club. You notice that there's a parenthesis there, and it says lifetime guarantee on service repairs, if you're in the club. So that means you have to maintain a service agreement to be a part of that guarantee. So it's not on a service repair that is a non-club member, because there was no way that we could guarantee that if we weren't doing regularly scheduled maintenance, and we didn't have the opportunity to identify problems with contactors, capacitors, fan motors that we would change ahead of the failure at no charge to a client in order to avoid a crisis failure later down the road. Much less expensive to do that. Again, it's just a costing issue, and that's something that we've talked about in the pricing side of the EGIA Contractor University website, so you can study that whole discipline. But the real issue is, do customers care about that, and is that a good brand promise for marketing? And it turns out that it is. The next discussion, lifetime no overtime. So if you're a club member or you want to advertise no overtime, certainly that's a brand promise. Then some non-industry brand promises. You'll remember Domino's of the 1980s and 1990s, 30 minutes or it's free. So they would deliver in 30 minutes or it's free. Now the interesting part about the Domino's discussion on the brand promise is the Domino's folks knew that the average delivery time for themselves and the industry was 27 minutes. So they were creating a brand promise for marketing purposes, and they knew that 30 minutes was a deliverable that they could hit, and it was measurable, of course, because obviously with GPS and sort of time in and time out on the order in and the delivery, it's not that difficult to measure. And the other part about that is whether you like Domino's today or not, sort of in the historical sense, when they had that as their promise, their product really wasn't necessarily the greatest pizza on the planet, and that's not by my standard, that's by consumers that have sort of rated the product over the years. So here's a company that built itself up with less than stellar product, used a great marketing platform, the 30 minutes or less. They seized the opportunity knowing that it wasn't really a difficult brand promise to hit, and it is measurable. So it's an interesting example of a historical context of where a brand promise was applied correctly on the marketing sense. And Domino's, by all accounts, was an excellent marketing company in their day, and I think they probably still are, although they've gone through some transition. Number 6 there, Jimmy John's, which was one of my favorite subs, freaky fast delivery. What does that mean, freaky fast? Well, it's a little bit up to you to decide what freaky means. Freaky fast for me means probably less than 30 minutes because Domino's conditioned me, and I'm an old guy. But if I'm a younger person or maybe somebody that's in the millennial generation, freaky fast might be 15 or 20 minutes. And so expectations for speed have changed a little bit with the younger folks. So freaky fast doesn't say a particular time frame, but it does designate that it's freaky fast, meaning that it's fast. So the adjective there clarifies for me that, hey, that's pretty fast. Freaky is fast. So Jimmy John's has done a nice job of marketing that, and I think most people who know Jimmy John's know that their slogan, their unique selling proposition, their brand promise is, hey, we're freaky fast. If you look at number 7, one of the best marketing platforms out there, I don't use them in my insurance business because their prices tend to be higher than everybody that I call, but if you use Geico Insurance, in 15 minutes or less, you can save 15% on your car insurance. And they are out in a broad-based media campaign and have multiple commercials. They have some of the best, funniest commercials, in my opinion, on TV today. And so there's multiple layers of their brand promise out there. And so whether or not they actually deliver on that, for me personally, each time that I shop my insurance, they have not been anywhere close to delivering that. But Warren Buffett is a pretty smart guy, and their company makes money, and it's a very profitable business, and they've used that as a good example. Number 7, the BMW, the ultimate driving machine. Another great example of a company that's been around for a long time, that's been their brand promise. And honestly, BMW builds, a pretty engineered machine. They're well known, and it's been well documented that their engineers pretty much over-engineer everything. And whether or not you've had a good experience or a bad experience with a BMW, the one thing that you'll say about a BMW is that they drive, and they drive well. And so if you get behind a BMW and you ride it, the steering is tight. The ergonomics are tight. I mean, there's just a lot of things in the engineering of the car that they're building. Is not about fuel efficiency in these cases. It's about, is this the ultimate driving machine? Now they're starting to move over to some technologies with the combined engines and so forth, where they've got the electrical and the gas engine combined and so forth in the i8 and some of the other things that they're doing that are leading them into some new ideas. But the ultimate driving machine is something that most people recognize. If you said, what's the BMW slogan, most people would know that. So it's a combination of having a brand promise that you can deliver, but also they've done a nice job of marketing over the years and staying true to that brand promise. So not only do we want to create a brand promise, but we don't want to get bored with our marketing and switch our brand promises around, because the cumulative effect of advertising over time externally is it builds up impressions, and those impressions they're psychological. And the more and more I understand that, the more and more you realize that you really, about the time people are getting bored with your marketing is the time you probably figure out that you're actually having an impact relative to your brand promise.